All right, welcome everybody. I think we've got everybody here in the room with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Good evening. My name is Lara Villamont. I'm the head of outreach and community experience at the Framingham Public Library. Tonight's event is romance writing and animal magnetism with New York Times bestselling author Christine Feehan. She is the author of almost 100 books, a lifelong writer of passion and adventure. Her books have been published in hardback, paperback, audiobook, ebook, and she even has a manga novel. Watch out, she's also a trained martial artist who specializes in women's self-defense. We are thrilled to feature Christine today, especially since her first job was at a public library. She'll be talking about her writing process and especially how she incorporates animal genes and shapeshifters into her book, which is perfect for our library summer reading theme of tales and tales. Well, let's kick off with kind of a general overview. Can you give us a snapshot into one of your books? How do you find the inspiration? What does it take to get it from inspiration to bookshelves?
Everybody asks me about my inspirations, and that's sort of a hard one for me because I am inspired by just about anything. The Shadow series was inspired. I was standing up on top of my stairs outside, and my Black Russian Terrier had gone down the stairs. There were a bunch of trees, and there were shadows everywhere, and he would disappear in and out of the shadows. And I'm just standing there, and all of a sudden, I start thinking about assassins being able to move through the shadows, and the story starts unfolding in my head. And that's kind of how this series was born. And that's the kind of thing that happens to me. I can be in a restaurant and I'll see a couple sitting there, and the man will kind of move his head a certain way towards the woman, and I'll just have this whole scenario unfold in my head. And then characters come to me and they start talking very loud and they want their stories told. And I have to tell their story. So I think in another century, I might have been in a mental institution for hearing voices. So, but yeah, that's what happens. I get inspired just by, the fog will come in and I suddenly will have this whole idea of a story. And Murder on Sunrise Lake, I got very excited about that. One of my daughters hiked the JMT Trail, the John Muir Trail, 267 miles alone by herself in the wilderness. And she has a group of friends, all women, who have these amazing jobs. They're all like her. They do these crazy things. They summit mountains and climb boulders, and they've been together for years doing these kinds of things, and I've been listening to them. And one day I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, as they're all talking, exciting about their trips, wow, what if there was a serial killer who was out there killing people, but making it look like accidents and nobody knew? Wow, that'd be really cool. So I start saying this to them and they're like, whoa, wait a minute. But, they all helped me and find really cool places to kill people and hide bodies. And it was just, it went on from there. But that's what happens to me is, I start, my head goes off into other places. So.
I mentioned in my intro, and also when you and I were chatting for our tech rehearsal earlier this week, and we talked about how, I had read your Ghost Walker series, which is a series about, if people here are unfamiliar, it's a series about a elite squad of commandos who have been genetically enhanced. Some of them have psychic abilities, but some of them have animal genetics. And then as I was preparing to have you here tonight, I also read your Leopard People series, which is about shadow leopard shape changers. So when I contacted you and I told you the theme, was there a particular character that your mind immediately flew to that was sort of on that theme?
You know, I have a lot of in the Leopard series. I really love those my leopards. I started writing years and years ago, long before erotica in my life was it really became a thing out there, and it was sort of my nod to that. I wasn't doing a lot of that at all in my writing, and that was kind of my nod to that genre. I didn't really fall over the edge of it with them, but it definitely edges that. And I studied leopards, and I went to sanctuaries, and I really looked at, I have so many books on leopards, and I've read them until they're literally falling apart. So that when I describe the men and women, I get everything. I try to get the way they move and the way they speak, and the temper and the passion of them right. I don't want someone to pick up a book of mine and go, oh, she says they're a leopard, but you don't feel that. I want people to feel when they are reading the book that they're reading about somebody who really could be a leopard. And leopards are really scary animals. They're the one animal that, well, there's a couple, but leopards are one of the ones that if you're hunting them, you better look out, because they may turn around and they could be tracking you. And there's not too many animals that do that, but leopards are one of them. And they're very intelligent creatures, and they're very passionate, which is one of the reasons that I chose them. And I read newspapers constantly. I constantly read the news. When I went to college, I chose journalism and English, of course, creative English and lit. And that taught me to constantly look at not just one article, but hundreds and hundreds in various newspapers. And I looked for leopards all the time. That's how I got the strawberry leopards one. That was shocking to me that they came up. And then that fueled my imagination. And I came up with this whole reason why they existed and did all this research. And so those characters in there, there's a few of them that really caught my attention and made me love them. And I hated moving on from them to somebody else. It's hard sometimes when you love them to give them up. And you think, did I do justice to them? Did I make my reader love them as much as I did? And you never know. You never know if you did or not.
Well, I think we're all here tonight because we do. So I have plenty of questions for Christine, but I do want to invite you all, if you have a question yourself, to please go ahead and put it in the chat or raise your hand, and we'd love to hear from our audience tonight as well. We sort of touched on this a little bit, Christine, but I read in another interview with you that you, by the end of this year, will have published over 95 stories, including novels, novellas, manga series. How do you keep track of all of your books and your characters?
I have, some people call them Bibles. I have, for each series, I have these very detailed notes with pictures, including houses that I have chosen for them, and yards and towns and streets. And, I try to put everything that I can in there, and details about their lives, and just about anything I can think of that I'm going to need when I write, you know, the next book. Obviously, there's going to be mistakes. And it's weird because sometimes everything's right. You go through the book 100 times and your copy editors too. And then somehow when the formatting's done, it changes the words. I mean, one time, Gregory's name was changed to Oregon throughout the whole book. And people would write to me and say, who's this new character, Oregon? We tried to change it all back, but one or two places escaped us and it got through. And we're like, what? It was crazy. But recently, one came back for the third time, you know, because you get these books all the time back. And I usually don't read the third one, someone else does for me, but I couldn't sleep one night and I picked it up and I read it and I was like, whose book is this? I didn't even write this book. This is so bad. And I called the person that always does my edits for me and I said, have you read this? And she's like, no, it was perfect. And I said, it is not now. There is a mistake in every single line of this book. And this is the last edit that would be normally going to print. And she's like, what are you talking about? We ended up having to get 5 people editing that book at the last minute. And we don't know whether it happened when they were putting it in a program and the program changed it. We don't know what happened. But of course, everything gets blamed on COVID. I don't know. But it was really, I was horrified. I'm like, if that thing had gone to print like that, I would have just stopped writing. I would have been like, okay, I can't even show my face. It was awful.
All right. It looks like we have a question from, is it Adia?
Adaya.
Adaya, excuse me.
No problem. That's okay. Christine, needs to say I love Murder at Sunrise Lake. You had me twisting so much. I went to this person, then to that person, and then I was like, well, maybe it's a male and female team. And then, but I always came back to the person I originally thought. So needs to say I was very sad about this person, but I understand, you know, with everything that happened to this person. But my question is, okay, this is not a series. It's going to be a standalone. In future books, like Red on the River, is that also a standalone? And I'm trying to be able to explain it. Sometimes people ask about it, and I would just want to be able to explain it properly. That it's not a series, it's standalone books.
Yes. Usually in my series, there is an arc that you can clearly see, even though the books in the series are a standalone. The couple has a happy ever after, but there's an arc within the series. So there's always some threads that are not completely finished with what's ever happening, say in the Carpathian world or in the Torpedo Ink world. There's still something going on that you might have to read another book to find out, oh, you know, in the club, maybe somebody wants to kill off Czar's family, but nobody knows who really wants to do it. But the couple themselves, their arc is completely finished. Okay. In Murder at Sunrise Lake, that story is absolutely complete in itself. And there's no tie, there's no tie to anything else. It's completely and done and finished. Red on the River will be the same. I will completely do a complete standalone book. It will, you don't have to read Murder on Sunrise Lake or any other book in order to read Red on the River when I write it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Adia. So I mentioned that I read an interview. I read in that same interview that you said that you don't suffer from writer's block. Do you ever finish writing something and decide that you don't like it, set it aside, go back and transform it, or toss it in the trash?
Oh, of course. I did that actually. I've done that with a few books where I finish a book and go read it and say, don't like this. And I don't have the luxury, because usually I'm under contract. I have to start the entire book again. I did that actually with Dark Tarot, where I started, I read the book and I went, you know what? I can do a heck of a lot better with this book. And these are the reasons that I don't like it. And this is how I'm going to rewrite it. And I started with page 1. And that book is way long, let me tell you. And I had to start it, and I just wrote it from page 1 all the way to the end. And I didn't use any content from the first book.
Do you think you might circle back to some of the content from the first book and reuse it in a totally different setting?
I don't even know if I kept it. Sometimes I won't keep something because then you work too hard to try to use it. I might have put it aside in case I wanted to use it for a deleted scene or something, but most of the time I try not to think about it, and I put something away where I don't know where it is. And trust me, with me, I can lose anything when it comes to my work. I'm constantly going, oh my gosh, I did something horrible. I don't know where anything is. And Denise, my daughter, who knows everything about computers, has to come find it. I'm always panicking.
So you mentioned your spreadsheet with all of your different characters and all of that, but you, as Adia touched on a little bit too, you have a lot of interlocking pieces within your books, cameos from other series. How do you keep track of all of those cameos and relationships and appearances and make sure that you don't, put yourself in a situation where a character can't do one thing or they're across the country?
Well, first of all, I never have one series appear in another series, ever. They never will put them together. And the reason for that is I have enough characters in one series to deal with, so I'm never going to put them together. So I make sure that I always know where my characters are. Like, I have to go through, and what I do is, it's not just me that has eyes on them. Once I know I want to use these characters, I'll make a list of the characters that I'm going to use in the book and I need to know where they are or how old they are or what they're going to do. And then I get 2 other people to go through and make sure that I'm right. And it has to be at least 2 people. And then they say, yes, this is right. If there's a question, then all 3 of us go back and we go and make sure that we're right. And it's all written down. And, if we have to, then all the books are gone through, every single book, until we find it. But usually it's all kept in that 1,000,000-page, what I said, it was like a Bible, if you will, with that word. It's pretty big now for the Carpathians and pretty big for the Ghost Walkers. Has quite a large one. Torpedo Ink is getting big because I have so much content in it already. I know so much about all of their stories that I have to, keep everything in there. So.
I just realized I promised to put the evaluation form in the chat and didn't. So it is in there now, and I'll pop it again at the end. Circling back to our animal theme, we talked a little bit about leopards and kind of them being drawing the attention of being magnificent and really compelling and, you know, rather cuddly if you ignore the teeth and the claws. Some of your other animal inspired characters are less cuddly, snakes and spiders and that sort of thing. So, you know, what pulls you towards creating a character inspired by one animal or another?
You know, I do so much research on various things that, for instance, in the Ghost Walkers, what do I need specifically for this person's abilities? They did a lot of this, many countries did a lot of experimenting with psychic abilities, but they did talk about what could they do to enhance soldiers in using various other forms. And there was a lot of talk about that. Whether they actually tried it or not, I have no idea. And I certainly hope they didn't, that they didn't experiment on children or any of the prisoners, but they certainly could have. So I imagined what would happen if these soldiers were given these various traits. And the first soldiers, the team 1 that were given them, they had a lot of problems. And so I imagined if he wanted them to climb very fast, what kinds of things would they need? And so I looked up all the different reptiles and all the different types of climbing, you know, thing that they would need on their hands and their feet, and then how would they have to cope with that? And that was that was pretty cool, trying to figure that out and reading about it. And then once I started doing that, I started seeing some of the actual, I wouldn't say experiments, but things that they already know that you can do with certain reptiles, with humans. And I'm like, oh, this isn't too far away. And it seems like every time I have come up with something, then maybe a month or 2 later, I read an article that I find this isn't that far out. And it's kind of shocking to me. So yeah, my ghost walkers are not that far from, from reality, I'm afraid.
I'd like to invite you all, if you have a question, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Talking about the size of your series, you know, J.K. Rowling is notorious for having plotted out her series from beginning to end. She knew all the way through, for the most part, what would happen. George R.R. Martin is notorious for being on the opposite end of the spectrum, where he writes as his characters take him. Where do you fall on that scale? Do you know how your stories will end, or how your series will end, for that matter?
No, I definitely would lose my mind. I wouldn't write a story if I really knew how it would end. I'm somebody who loves to read, and I've always loved that from the time I was a little child. And I'm not somebody who looks at the end of a book. I know a lot of people do that. They'll read the end before they read the beginning. And if I did that, I wouldn't read the story. I have to read the story to know how it ends. And so if I plotted out the whole story or did an outline of the story, that would be the book for me. I would be like, okay, well, I already wrote it, throw it out, you know? And I remember when I went to a meeting for the first time with a friend of mine, and there were all these people there that were writing books, and they made everybody stand up and say how many books they'd written. And they got to me, and I wasn't even supposed to really be there. And I felt really silly because everybody was, I've written one, I've written two, and I probably had written 300 and they were all under my bed. Because as soon as I wrote one, I didn't polish it or anything. I just wrote the story as fast as I could to get it out and see what happened. I just wanted to see what happened to these people. And then I'd toss it under my bed and start writing another story as fast as I could, just like you'd read a book. And that's how I write my stories. I just want to see what happens to them. And so if I plotted it out, I would know, and then I wouldn't write the story. So no, the characters have to take me on that journey.
We have a question in the chat from Tara. She wants to know, how long have you been writing? How long did it take before your first publication? And do you have any advice for aspiring writers?
Well, okay. I started writing as soon as I could put sentences together on a piece of paper. I had no aspirations really to publish. I had great aspirations to be the best martial artist that I could possibly be in a time when there weren't that many female martial artists around. I'm a lot older than I want to ever admit. And I published a book mainly because my children needed to eat. And I was no longer teaching martial arts because I'd been teaching for about 27 years maybe, and I had some health issues and I had to stop, and I still had children, and they had been taught that they needed to eat for some reason. They kept it up. And a girlfriend of mine said, oh, send one of your books in. And at the time I was working on, the dark prints. And I said, oh, they don't do paranormal, and you have to have an inn, and they don't do vampires. And she's like, just send it in. And I did. And I got a call and I hung up on her because I didn't really think I wanted to sell my book to somebody. And in the end I did, because I really needed the money, And I'm glad I did. I mean, it's been an amazing, amazing journey, and I've met so many amazing people along the way, and so many authors have reached out to help me, and I hopefully have passed that along. As far as tips, I always wonder when somebody asks me how far along they are on their journey. My first tip is always sit your butt in a chair and write, because so many people talk about it, but they don't actually do it. And here's my thing. I had a lot of children, a lot of them, and I took a lot of children in. Some of them had a lot of problems, and I took them in. They were in my home. And I always had a couple of jobs. So I was pretty busy, but I always found time to write because I wanted to write. I didn't always have a laptop. I didn't have computers. I couldn't afford them. So I would have a notebook, and I would take that notebook with me. If my kids had to go to baseball practice, I would drive them to baseball practice, and I would sit up in those stands and I would write. And then I'd drive them home, and I'd do whatever I had to do at home. If they were watching TV, I wasn't watching TV. I was sitting in there and I was writing. And here's the other thing. If you write 1 page a day, at the end of a year, you have a novel. That's 1 page a day. That's all you have to write. And at the end of a year, you actually have a book. That's it. So a lot of times you are really making excuses for yourself, and you're thinking, I can't do this because I have kids, or I have a job, or you really can. You have to say, I'm doing this for me. A lot of times you're doing all these things for other people. You're not doing it for you. You need to say, this is what I want to do. And you make yourself do it for you. That's the other thing is when people say they have writer's block, most of the time, the reason you're having problems is you inserted yourself into that story, your own reaction. So you have a character, your character's doing great, moving through the story, and then all of a sudden, the whole story stops. You have to take a look at what your character was doing, what you did, have him do. And my guess is that somewhere along the line, you thought, I don't want him to act like that, or I don't want her to react like that. And you put your actions in there, how you would react. You maybe even did it subconsciously. 90% of the time, that's what happens. And you have to go back and find out where you did that. And most of the time you have to delete this scene that mostly you liked, or you were trying to get to a place where you could write a scene that you really wanted to write. And you have to let go of that dream because your character's not going to do something that he's not, or she wouldn't really do. And that's the truth. And ask any seasoned writer and they'll tell you most of the time you put yourself in that story and gave your character your own reaction.
I see we have a question from Adia in the chat. I'm going to get to it in just a second, but I'd actually love to capitalize a little bit on what you just said, because I have a question that's along those lines. I was doing my research for this interview and I, stumbled down the Goodreads rabbit hole and I saw some reviews of your book. I think it was Spider Game, where a lot of people said they were a big fan, but they didn't like the reactions of the characters and they didn't like that book. You put a lot of heart and soul and effort and feeling into your characters in your book. How do you navigate negative feedback and criticism?
I don't read reviews. I don't. And the reason for that is that if you get, if you let yourself go there, it can stop you from writing. It can just like completely, get you to a place where you can't write at all. And I've seen too many writers quit because it just locks them up and they're just like, I can't deal with this. And it is very distressing. You do put your heart and soul into it and you're very passionate about your work and you love every character that you have and every book that you put out and you work very hard on them. And when you have people that say really mean, ugly things, it is very hard to take. And, they say, well, I have the right to say whatever I want. And they do. I mean, they do. They bought the book. They read the book. They didn't like the book. That's okay. And most of them, I think, will say it in a way that is not mean and ugly. But I will tell you, there are a lot of people that say so many, you have no idea the letters that someone like me can get and other authors can get from people that love to write really nasty, ugly things. And you get enough of them. And like I say, people just stop. They can't deal with it and they quit writing. And you'll see a writer that won't write for, 3 years or 4 years. And you can bet that's probably why. And I just don't go there because it's too hard. You're already dealing with isolation, sitting in a room by yourself, wondering if there's anybody out there, paying attention to anything you're doing. So you, it's easier to just write your stories and hope somebody loves them and hope somebody's gonna, you know, I sometimes will get so excited to share something, and then I'll get some horrible letter from somebody, and I'll be like, why did I even share that out there, you know? And then instantly my team will say, don't read your mail, we'll vet your mail first. Just write your books. I mean, because it's hurtful. And people don't think, I guess, that you have feelings or that you should have feelings because, after all, you know, they have the right to tell you these things. And they do. I'm not saying they don't. They have the right to their opinion. But I have the right to not listen.
All right, we've got a slightly more cheerful question from Adia. She wants to know, starting with Leopards Fury, we can hear the leopard's thoughts. What made you decide to include the human/leopard conversation in the Leopard series?
I thought that it would be more exciting for the reader. It was more exciting for me. I always could hear the leopard myself. And I thought, you know, I think if I included the reader in this, it would be more interesting. And sometimes I could feel that even the leopards, the leopard female would be wanting to help her, the girl, and couldn't reach her. And it would be so upsetting to me. And I thought, I should be able to somehow get that across to my reader. And there are so many things that I feel sometimes that I want to get across to my reader that I know about these things. And I don't always have a way to put them out there. And that was one of the ways that I felt I could include the reader in that circle between me, the leopard, and, you know, the man or woman. So, and I hope that it added to the, you know, to the book.
We've got a question from Tara. She wants to know, when you're writing, do you have a particular audience or reader in mind, or would you say you write primarily for yourself?
I never, gosh, that's an interesting question. I never think about, I just write the story. I write the story the way whoever's telling me the story. I don't even think I write for I'm not even sure I write the story for me. Whoever's telling me the story, the story's unfolding the way they're telling it to me. And sometimes, honest to God, there was one story, I hated the guy. I called my editor and I said, I hate this hero. I hate him. I want to kick him from here to hell and back. And she's like, well, just change him. And I said, I can't change him. This is who he is. And she's like, you know, you're kind of nuts. And I said, yeah, I know, but I'm going to torture him or something because he deserves it. No, the story truly unfolds the way it's supposed to be. I know that sounds nuts, but no, I don't write for other people. And I don't think I write for me either. I write a story for myself that's in my head that has to come out, but I don't write the story for myself. I write the way the characters need the story to be told. Does that make sense? Now you guys all know I'm nuts. Erin's gonna go, okay, we're never letting her do an interview again.
We won't tell if you won't.
Oh yeah, she's sitting right there.
Well, Teresa would like to know, in your Dark series, do you know how soon that Gary and the Triplets are going to get their stories? And will the Triplets each get their own story, or will they share one? And she'd also like to add, thank you, and you are so amazing.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I don't actually, I'd have to forward the story 20 years for sure, or 18 at the very least, because, I can't very well have Gary's, well, a couple of years have gone by, so maybe it won't be 18 years, but, clearly I can't have babies getting married. So it's gonna be a little while, but I do have some really great books planned in the interim, and that will help the time go by. And I will forward a couple years, hopefully, but I do have some awesome books planned, starting with Dark Tarot. So I'm hoping that everybody will get very excited once that book comes out, and then, we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out. But I do have Gary's book planned. I do. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it will be before I croak.
We hope that. I don't know what we'd do if we didn't have the end of the story.
Oh my gosh.
You've said
well,
that
fortunately, my son is a really good writer, and I'll just make sure he takes over.
Have a Wheel of Time situation. It's been done before.
Right.
You've said that you, in the past, that you strive for inclusivity. You have characters of color, you have LGBTQ characters, neurodiverse characters, differently abled characters. How do you go about the work of inclusivity, especially if it's something that's outside of your life experience?
I hate to admit this, but I'm so old and I have such a huge family. There's not too much that's outside my life experience. So, in the beginning of my career, there wasn't a lot of, there were a few of us that tried really hard to include various characters that weren't in other books. And I was lucky enough to have companies, and publishing companies and editors that would allow us to do that. And we fought really hard to get as many diverse characters as we could in our books. And I will tell you, when I saw it opening up and saw the other authors really getting breaks and their books becoming really popular, I actually burst into tears when I was at a thing with a couple of them, because it was so exciting to see that actually happen. I mean, it was history being made, that they made bestseller lists, and you didn't think it was ever going to happen for a while. But with me, I have a big family. So there were marriages, and there were children, and there were, autism in the family, and there was lesbians, and there was Black, and there was gay, and there was transgender, and there was, you name it, it's been in our family. And so I was lucky enough to be able to, from the time I was quite young, to be exposed to everything. And my parents were very open and honest with all of us. And I remember one of my daughters, when somebody called her white, she was horrified. She was very young, and she's like, "Mommy, they called me white. I'm not white. And I looked at her. She was so white, she'd blind you. And I said, what color are you? And she said, I'm peach. And I was like, okay. You know, it just was, it was very, in our family, we grew up in a family where there just was so many different, it was easy to talk to people and say, you know, how would you do this? How would you word this? What, you know, what character, when I did Marianne in the Carpathian series, Marianne, there was a counselor who was Black, and she was a counselor, and oh my God, that woman had no fear. She would go into these places that nobody else would go. But you know, it was easy to consult with her. She liked Michael Kors clothing, and you know, and I told her, okay, I'm going to put you in a jungle. And when she's like, what? And I go, yep. And so I'd come up with these scenarios, and then she'd tell me this is what I would say and do, you know. So we had fun with that. And then Joan, one of the girls that I know, we did Trixie. She was Trixie, and I had fun talking to her about, you know, what character, how she would be. And then one of the ghost walkers who was in a wheelchair, my uncle was in a wheelchair. And so it was, you know, really interesting using the people that were willing to talk to me. This is how I would maneuver that situation. So I was lucky enough to have real people, primary sources, who would sit down with me and actually play out the scene with me.
You mentioned erotica sort of in passing, and you've also said that you don't consider your work erotica because you consider it more romance. There's a building of a relationship before there's any sort of sex or any kind of intimate interaction. How do you balance those elements of romance, thriller, and drama in your series and all of your books?
Well, I try to have a balance. You know, that's one of those things that I work on all the time. I really do. I work on the pacing of my stories. I try to make every story better all the time. It's a thing with me. And I want a relationship between a man and a woman. And here's why I love romance. I absolutely love romance. And I know that you get a lot more if you do literary, or you do thrillers, or you do mystery, or you do, you know, if you put that label on a writer, she gets a lot more respect. But I feel like women who are in a relationship, and it, when I say intimate, when you're intimate with a man and you are with him for 30, 40 years, you can be just as beautiful and lovely to him and have a great sex life with him as the mistress that is always portrayed in every movie and in all these different books as being the hottest, coolest chick in the world. And I hate that. I really, truly do. Because why is the wife always the one who's this nasty woman? And it isn't like that. I mean, it makes me mad. And I feel like in romance, it's a monogamous relationship. And you can build up this beautiful intimacy even if there's real problems, which there are in real life. And here's something that I always tell people, and it's the truth. My parents were married 62 years. My They had 14 children. Let me tell you, there were problems. But my mother said to me, a man can be a great lover if he has a different partner every night, or even every couple years. You try being a partner for 40, 50 years, that's a great lover. That is a man who is inventive. That is a man that can call himself a great lover. And that's the truth. And that's, to me, when I start a couple out, I think, what is this couple going to be like 40, 50, 60 years from now? And I want to do that in my books. I want to show that in a romance books, in my Leopard books. I want them to have him to look at her and think, no matter what she looks like, she is the most beautiful woman to him. And the way she acts, no matter what, she is that woman for him. And to me, that's romance.
Tara would like to know which other authors or books have influenced you.
Well, when I was a child, obviously, Sherlock Holmes. I loved everything Sherlock Holmes. And when I was a kid, I read a lot of Jean Stratton Porter and Little Women. Oh my God, I read that book 10 billion times. All the classics. I read them over and over and over. They were my favorites, and I read them when I was quite young. And then I got into, when I was a single mom and very young and had a lot of kids, I got into the Harlequin because you could read them super fast. And I could read them when the kids were eating and finish them because I was a pretty fast reader. So I got into those. Now I read Jane Ann Krentz. She can come up with some pretty good storylines, that girl. I like, I don't know if you've read Christopher Rice's, his Bone music, oh my gosh, that trilogy is great. I read that quite recently and went, oh, I should have written that. He is so good. Yeah, I really like that. I can't say anybody really influences me, but I've been reading a lot of independents lately. At night, I try to skim through and read them. I've been reading, of course, I read JR because I truly love her. She's such a sweet girl. Gina Showalter, I like her. I have a little group that I read. I don't have a lot of time to read. I go through periods of time where I just don't have the time, and it's upsetting to me. But then all of a sudden I will just be too tired to write at night, and I'll start reading at the end.
Harriet would like to know, how do you prevent your writing style from becoming formulaic and predictable?
I don't ever think about stuff like that because in my mind, the characters are real people. And so if they're real, they have a life, and they're going to tell me a story that is their story. And so whatever it is, it's going to be, it's like, I'm different from you are, and from Adiah, and from Aaron, and all of our stories are different, and what's happened to us is different. And so if there's 1,000 people, all of them have a different story to be told. And so in my mind, I never think of who came before. when I'm writing a story, what's happening like right now, I'm writing, and I'm going to give away who's in Phantom Game, but it's Jonas. I see you. Jonas from Team One. And, you know, what happened to him is far different than what happened to anybody else on that team. And he's with Camellia, Cami, who was one of the very first orphan girls that Whitney, the villain, experimented on. And what happened to her is going to shock everybody, very much so. They're going to all be like, OMG, what did that Christine do? But I didn't do it. Somebody else did it. I am innocent of all bad things. So to me, I never feel like it's ever going to get like that. I'm never going to write the same thing over and over and over, because how can I tell a story, somebody else's story, when it's a new person and it's his story or her story to be told, and it can't possibly be the same, right? They're real people. See how crazy I am?
Well, we are running short on our time, but I wanted to bring it back to the animal themes for our closing question. Is there a particular animal that's been on your mind that it hasn't really worked for your characters to be able to drive their story forward, but you'd love to be able to somehow work it in?
You know, I've tried a couple of times to do the tiger thing. I've brought it in a couple of times and it's never panned out. And I don't know why exactly. I've gone to the tiger sanctuaries and I've even walked one around. Ugh, that was scary as hell. But yeah, I don't know what it is. It's like me trying to write a Western. Let me tell you, I love Westerns. Like, I have every book Lewis Moore ever wrote in his life. I grew up reading them. Like, I love Westerns. I tried writing them. Oh my God, worst books that ever walked the face of the earth. Oh my God, they're horrible. They truly are horrible. So was my tiger books. Yeah, they're not good. They're not good. I don't know why. So yeah, I'd like to do something with tigers, but it's not working out for me.
Well, someday when your tiger book comes out, we'll all think to ourselves, oh, we knew that insider tip back when.
You'll all run out and get it. So you'll say this is the worst book ever.
No way.